Jacob Rees-Mogg, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
It's a great pleasure to be here.
Good morning to you. Well, I suppose my first question really needs to be, given this poll on the Conservative Home website among Tory party members, thinking that you would be the best choice by a long way as the next Tory leader, why do you think so many members of the Conservative Party think you would be a good leader, since you've never held ministerial office?
I think Paul Goodman, who wrote the piece up for Conservative Home, put his finger on it. I don't think people want me as me. I think they want something different. I think there is a feeling that in politics everything has become too much the same, and they want something slightly different. But I don't think people seriously want me, and therefore I'm not allowing this to go to my head, that it is not a serious prospect. It's more an indication of frustration with the election result and with other things that are going on politically.
So you don't seriously think you'll ever be a Conservative Party leader?
Not until you do. And you never will, and you've known me a very long time.
I have to confess to my lovely talkRADIO listeners that Jacob and I were at university together. I think you are a couple of years below me.
I'm much older than you, I must be.
Well, dress-wise, yes. I've dressed as a 16-year-old. No, my jeans and my jumper. But no, I have known you for a very long time, and I have to say, if someone had told me when I was at university with you that you'd one day be leader of the Tory party and Prime Minister, I would laugh probably as hard as I'm probably going to laugh. That's right. And I don't mean that rudely, but this is what I'm fascinated by. We've had such the criticism of Theresa May over her sort of being out of touch and wooden and robotic, and the criticism of David Cameron and Tony Blair for being PR men. You would be different, but how different is the British public ready for?
Look, I've served in no office. I'm not a candidate. I'm not in any sense going to be a candidate. It's been all great fun. I don't pretend that I haven't enjoyed it. It's been very amusing all summer having this go on. But it will fade. Just wait. Next year I know what will happen. Next year I will go to the Tory party conference and people will nudge each other and say, look, there's that chap who used to be Jacob Rees-Mogg. That is what happens to political careers.
Has it actually damaged you then?
No, I don't think it's done me any harm at all. I think it's, in a way, been helpful to what I really want to do, and that is to put conservative arguments across, because it's all in some sense about having a platform, chance to put forward the arguments about Brexit, a chance to put forward arguments about what a conservative government ought to be doing in terms of helping people have a higher standard of living, in terms of economic policy we should have, and that the platform has been raised, so to speak, and that is beneficial from my point of view.
Indeed, you're on television and radio incessantly. But do you think then you might have damaged your platform, your ability to speak to ordinary people, attract floating voters to your party cause by, well, I suppose being so honest about your Catholic beliefs on some rather serious moral issues?
Well, first of all, I loathe the term ordinary people, because I don't think anybody I ever meet is ordinary. I think that everybody in this country is exceptional in his or her individual and unique way, and I dislike politicians classifying the electorate as ordinary, assuming that we're some sort of priestly caste who know better. So I'm sorry to sort of pick that up, but I've always thought that's rather important. The words that ring in my mind are, what profiteth it a man to gain the whole world but lose his soul? There are some things that are more important than here today, gone tomorrow popularity, and the teaching of the Catholic Church, as far as I'm concerned, is in that category.
So it was a choice between having to change your views, vote against moral issues which are dictated by your faith, you feel, or a political career. You would leave your political career.
The question of life is, I think, one of absolute importance, and the teaching of the Church, which I fully accept, is that life begins at the point of conception and lasts until natural death.
And do you abide by, I mean, the issues that you're on GMB and interviewed by Piers Morgan regarding your views on abortion, and you said in no circumstance was abortion acceptable, even in the circumstance of incest or rape. A lot of people were very unhappy.
Well, perhaps we should talk about that a bit, because, of course, the overwhelming abortions are not in those circumstances. No. And you always have to defend, and it's quite right that I should be pushed to defend the teaching of the Church in the hardest cases, because if you can't defend it in the hardest cases, then you can't necessarily defend it on the easiest cases. Now, nobody would suggest that rape is not a particularly evil crime, one of the worst crimes that can be committed. The question then is that made better by removing a life that may come from it. And if you believe, as I think most people accept, that life begins at the point of conception.
I don't think they do they?
I think most people accept that that's the point at which it begins. They may argue about whether it's viable or whether you have the right to remove it, but that is the point at which life has begun. I don't think anybody has set any other date.
Okay.
Yes,
carry on.
that is agreed upon. But if you accept that, then even in those terrible circumstances, you are still taking a life that has been created. And is that the right thing to do? Does that remove the wickedness that led to it? Has not...
Can I put this to you then? I'm an atheist.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe there is a God. I had 4 miscarriages. Why did your God kill 4 of my babies?
That's one of the great questions that Christianity and other religions has faced, the question of evil and the love of God. Why do bad things happen when there is an all-loving God? And the best answer, that is probably derives from Irenaeus of Lyons, is that the allowance of free will means that there is therefore evil in the world, because to have genuinely free will, people have to be free to choose evil as well as good. And that...
What, did my unborn babies chose evil? I don't understand.
No, that is therefore...
Your God, no, but you believe that life begins at conception, and we have no right to take the life of that baby. But your God took the life of my 4 babies that died.
But there is evil in the world, and that is part of the human condition. And why is that? Well, because there is free will.
I don't think you've answered the question.
I think I've answered it as well as I can. Okay. That it is the great conundrum of Christianity.
It is. Do you abide by every single teaching of the Catholic Church? Because you feel very strongly about, say, for instance, same-sex marriage and about abortion. But do you abide by every teaching of the Catholic Church? So, for instance, you didn't have sex before you married your wife. I mean, which ones do you stick by?
And I do my best to eat fish on Fridays, but I don't always succeed. We are all sinners, so of course I don't perfectly follow the teaching of the Church.
Okay.
That is a worthy ambition, but it is none of us succeed.
Do you have gay friends?
I have friends of all types and views and so on. So certainly I've got friends who lead lifestyles that are different from me. If 2 male friends or 2 female friends of yours got married, would you refuse to attend their wedding because you don't believe in same-sex marriage? No, I wouldn't, because...
You would attend? If
I were invited, but it's
yes, they may not want someone who thinks they're going to hell coming to their wedding. It's a possibility,
But
Jacob.
I don't think they're going to hell.
Aren't they?
It's not for me to judge. This is the important thing. That
but your church teaches that.
But so many times...
Your church teaches that.
Hold on. So many times Christ says, "Judge not that ye be not judged." Why do you take the mote out of your brother's eye when you leave the beam in your own? It would be absurd for a lay Catholic to go round judging something that is in the power of God's hands, not of mine. It's not for me to judge how other people lead their lives.
And yet you're a politician and able to vote on these issues.
I'm able to vote on these issues, and we are a democracy.
That's judging what other people can do, isn't it? That's exactly what politicians do.
It's not judging what people do, it's saying what the laws should be. The two are different.
I don't think it is, actually. When you say what the laws should be, it's based on a judgment about what you think the laws should be, based on your beliefs.
But you're not judging individuals.
But individuals are affected by the law.
Individuals are,
whether or not 2 men or 2 women who love each other can get married is affected by choices that people like you make as an MP.
You are not judging the choices that they make in their lives. And I believe firmly that people should have as much freedom of choice as possible without damaging others. And we are a democracy, and the law is as it is.
Well, I defended you when these comments emerged about abortion and gay marriage. I disagree with you very fundamentally on them. You may have gathered. But I do believe in 2 key things. One, freedom of speech. And that I'm very much also the view that our politicians should be honest. And I very much admire the fact that you said things that were probably very unpopular for a lot of voters, and that you were honest about your views. And I want you to be able to express those views. But were you surprised by the reaction to you giving your giving honest answers to straight questions.
I was surprised that people were surprised. I mean, I'm expressing what has been the teaching of the Catholic Church pretty consistently for the last 2,000 years. There's nothing very unusual.
And the teaching of other major religions, including Islam.
Indeed. I wasn't saying anything that anybody who knew what the Catholic Church teaches would be surprised by, and most commentators do. Nor anything that most people who know me would
Catholic
be
MP
surprised
believes
by.
in Catholic views, yes.
It doesn't normally seem very exciting. But I think there is a broader point that's worth making. And that is, and we see this with safe spaces in universities and all of this, there is, from the left, an attack on free speech. And I think we should be very worried about that, not in concern particularly of what I've said, but in other areas, and the feeling that you shouldn't say things because they may offend. Actually, you should say everything that doesn't incite violence if you want to and if you believe it, because then people can argue it and decide whether they agree or disagree, and you destroy the worst arguments as long as they are made. If they're not made, there's no opportunity to challenge them, to defeat them, and I think this pressure from the left is very undesirable.
Tim Farron left the Liberal Democrat leadership because he felt that his faith sort of got in the way of his politics. His politics got in the way of his faith. To a certain extent, I feel hounded out of politics because of his views. Do you feel that we in this country, perhaps in the media, perhaps in social media particularly, treat people of the Christian faith rather more questioningly and rather more harshly than we treat people of other minority faiths in this country? So, for instance, have the same questions been asked of politicians who are Muslim?
I don't know, actually. I think it's sometimes easy to say that, but I'm not sure there's a huge amount of evidence for it. I think the views of some Muslim preachers get pretty thoroughly questioned in the press. And I think it's fair for people to question my views. I also think it's fair for them to make a political judgment on them, because when you put yourself forward for election, you have no ability to decide the basis on which people choose. They may vote for me or not for me on my religious views or my conservative views. They may vote for me because they dislike my opponent more than they dislike me. And it's a free and democratic country, and people don't have to give an explanation for the way they vote.
Why did you go into politics? You were born into a wealthy, successful family. Your father was editor of the Times. You went to Eton, the top public school. When you went to Oxford, you went into the city. You could have a lovely private life, living in your big mansion with your beautiful wife and your 6 children. Why on earth did you go into politics?
Well, it's very interesting, and I do think that people in my position ought to try and give something back to society. I make no bones about the fact.
This is your sort of community service.
I've been very fortunate. Many people would probably rather I did other types of community service and excluded myself from politics. But I think if you have an interest in it and can do it, then it is a very worthwhile thing to do. And I do enjoy it as well. I'm fascinated by politics, but you can do things that help people. The most rewarding part of politics is one by one helping constituents who face difficult problems and are being badly treated by the state and getting that sorted out. OK,
Jacob Rees-Mogg is going to stay with me. We're going to take a break, and then I'm going to find out whether he agrees with Harriet Harman that because he's never changed a nappy for any of his 6 children, that he's a deadbeat dad. Do stay tuned. I'm back with Jacob Rees-Mogg, Tory MP for North East Somerset, possible future Tory leader if you believe the polls of Tory members. He's joining me in the Talk Radio studio. Thank you again for speaking with us, Jacob. As I mentioned just before the break, you've been in the news over lots of issues, not least because of the birth of, and congratulations, by the birth of your 6th child, Sixtus, caused quite a kerfuffle in the media with your choice of name. It is also emerged in the last couple of weeks that you, despite being a father of 6, have never changed a nappy. Harriet Harman, the former deputy leader of the Labour Party, has called you a deadbeat dad. Are you a deadbeat dad?
Well, I don't know. My children will no doubt tell me in years to come what they think of having me as a father. I'm sure there are good bits and bad bits. But I wouldn't expect Miss Harman particularly to approve of how the Rees-Mogg family operates, that we do one thing, she does another. But I expect Miss Harman is a very good mother, as it happens. I wouldn't want to criticise her mothering skills because I don't really know anything about them.
It would be an extraordinary thing, actually, if you did criticise her mothering skills, but it seems to be fair play for her to criticise your fathering skills.
That is the world we live in, and I'm afraid it's all water off a duck's back.
Why haven't you? I mean, you'd think by accident, with 6 children, at some point you might have been left in the room with a baby that needed a nappy change. I mean, just pure odds, really, at this point. Why have you not changed a nappy?
Well, I don't think Nanny would approve. I think she would not feel that I was able to do it properly.
You were raised by your nanny.
I was.
I can also remember at university your nanny arriving, giving with goodies and picnic
Absolutely
basket
right,
hampers.
yes.
Is she still?
She's still going strong. Yes.
So
yes.
your nanny is currently nanny to
all 6 children.
All 6 of your children. So she would never allow you to change a nappy.
She would be shocked.
So does your wife not change nappies?
Oh no, my wife does. Yes.
Okay. Do you think that changing nappies is woman's work?
No, I don't. It's just the way life runs in the Rees-Mogg household.
Okay. Well, Daddy goes out and earns the big bucks and...
Well, I am reasonably busy, but actually the great joy of life is being with one's children, even if not changing their nappies.
Let's talk about something else that's been in the news in the last 24 hours. George Osborne, the former Chancellor, was one day people thought it often a Tory leader, like people are saying about you. He made some comments, according to reports in the press yesterday, that he has talked about Theresa May, saying he's not going to rest and she's cut up in small pieces in his freezer. What do you make of his comments?
I think it's very sad. I admired George Osborne as Chancellor. He did a lot of good things. He got the big issue on the deficit right. And he is an able and highly intelligent man who is descending into worse bitterness and bile than Ted Heath. And I wouldn't have thought any sensible politician would want to take on the Ted Heath role model of decades of bitterness. It's sad that he should be thinking like this, should be speaking like this. A man of his ability should be demeaning and disgracing himself with these sorts of comments, and I feel sorry for him. It must be a difficult time for him if he is reduced to saying these sorts of things.
We say a difficult time. This is a man who's got, I think, 6 jobs, all of whom, in between them, are paying him telephone number salaries. He didn't get the top job of being Prime Minister or staying in government. Do you think he just thought that it was his job and Theresa May has stolen it from him and he had a sense of ownership, a sense of entitlement?
Yes, I think that's probably a correct analysis from what people closer to him than I am have said. He assumed it would be his and was bitterly disappointed when it didn't work out that way.
You come from a similar sort of background to George Osborne and David Cameron. You've grown up with money. You've gone to top public school. Do you think it's difficult in this day and age, in Britain in particular, to be a public school boy, certainly someone who lives in a 3-piece suit? And I have to say, I've never seen you in it. Genuinely, 3 years at university, never saw you wear anything but a suit. I gather you said if they made 3-piece pyjamas, you'd buy those, but they don't.
Yes.
But do you think it's difficult to be a public school boy and be in politics, or do you think you'd be more successful as a politician if you come from, and you picked me up on this earlier, an ordinary family, a family where they might worry about paying the mortgage, a family where they might worry about the weekly food shop, might worry about their child's local state school? You've never had to have any of these worries in your life, and you never will, and neither will your children.
It's always difficult to know what other families worry about. I'd be slightly cautious of going down that line as it happens. But I don't think the bulk of voters mind what the background of politicians happens to be. I think it's very often written up because it makes an interesting part of the profile, and we want to know what type of characters are in high office. But bear in mind that opinion polls showed when William Hague was opposing Tony Blair that most voters thought William Hague had been to a public school and that Tony Blair had been to a state school, which was the precise reverse of the truth. It showed, I think, that people didn't really mind.
It's not really an issue for ordinary.
I don't think so. And on Eton, I think this country should be so proud of Eton, that it is one of the best schools not only in the country but in the world. People from all over the world want to send their sons to Eton. It is a British success, and we should boast about it rather than being so sort of cautious about Eton.
Apart from the fact that it's a success and it's a school that people would desperately love to send their children to, but only if they've got, 35k a year spare net income?
Eton probably gives more scholarships than almost any other public school. It's the foundation by Henry VI was for 70 poor scholars, and those scholarships still exist, and they've been fundraising for more scholarships recently. So, yes, of course, it's predominantly for people who can afford the fees, but it has a wide scholarship scheme for the academically gifted.
Do you think then that it doesn't affect things like your ability to understand how other people's daily lives live? So, for instance, knowing what a pint of milk costs, knowing what a loaf of bread costs in your local supermarket. Have you ever had to worry about those things?
I've always thought those questions are slightly bogus because they're going back to a 1970s time when the price of bread and the price of milk were set by the government, which they're not anymore, and therefore...
Well, no, they're about knowing. I mean, if an MP and you get to vote on, for instance, things like tuition fee loans and tuition fees, interest rates and things like pay rises for public sector workers, how much they've got in their pockets does matter when they go to the supermarket.
That's absolutely true, but prices vary so much more than they used to. That was all that I'm saying. That a pint of milk can be 45p, or it can be, if you want to get specially hand-milked Jersey cow stuff, very expensive. So, and bread likewise. There are great varieties in bread prices. I've never thought that it is possible to lead other people's lives. So the best any of us can do is empathise and understand, and that is a frame of mind from yourself, not from others, and applies to everybody regardless of where they've come from. And again, to go back to what I was saying about quotes ordinary people, I think it's very condescending to pretend that you can understand how millions of people lead their lives. Millions of people don't lead their lives in one way. They all lead them in their own individual way.
Well, you certainly live your life in an individual way. One thing on which you and I absolutely agree, though, is Brexit. I must finally end this interview with asking you what you think of our state of play in terms of Brexit negotiations, and in particular in the wake of the European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker's State of the Union speech yesterday. Are we going to get a deal when we leave the EU?
Well, first of all, I think Mr. Juncker's speech is extremely welcome because it proves why we want to leave and why it's so important that we leave.
He'd have won a lot of votes for the Leave campaign if he'd made that a year or so ago.
He would, and he kept quiet a year ago as far as he could. So I think that's very encouraging because it reinforces the view of the British people that leaving is right. I've always thought no deal is better than a bad deal, and the EU, I think, has finally realised that we don't owe them any money, and they'd better get their act together and offer us something sensible if they want to get in it, because if they don't have our money, it's all got to be paid for by the Germans, and I'm not sure Mrs Merkel's voters are keen on that.
Do you think that our negotiating position is going well? Do you think Theresa May, David Davis et al., are they doing a good job?
I think very much so. I was really pleased by what happened in late August, because suddenly they realised our position was much stronger than they had bargained for, which is why they were so angry at the end of that session. They thought we'd just roll over and have our tummies tickled, and they've suddenly discovered that the British bulldog doesn't behave like that.
And if there is a reshuffle and a ministerial post is up for grabs, would you most want to be in the Brexit department?
Well, when Mrs May was asked this direct question, she giggled. So I don't think this is in the offing.
Jacob Rees-Mogg, Conservative MP, North East Somerset. Possibly a future Tory leader. He's shaking his head. Possibly not. Thank you very much indeed for talking to us here at talkRADIO.